you, LafargeHolcim, for having me here. Here we are. Okay. Sometimes it works. Yeah. I'm going to talk about water as a special envoy for water. What else is there to do? And water is infrastructure to certain, but not always. Here you see someone you probably know. She looks a little grumpy. She always looks a little grumpy, some say. From my perspective, I would look grumpy if I knew that this was the main flood protection system of Germany. This is closer to the US, not certain. This is Miami. Watch the guy coming out of the sewage system. He's actually looking for the leak. You laugh, but it is serious. But this is not a leak. This is the ocean coming up out of the streets of Miami, almost every week now. It's a very vulnerable place. More serious, water, or actually the lack of water, or better addressed, the mismanagement of water was at the core of the Syrian conflict. Now, the mismanagement of water then becomes a weapon of mass destruction. Where is this? Who's from the US? Where is this? Colorado River. What? Hey. Who did that? Can someone, well, whatever. Yeah. Colorado River, back again. Yeah, it's almost gone. Colorado River created the Grand Canyon. You know, this Grand Canyon, this great river. It hasn't seen the Gulf of California in 65 years. And you, US, do tough negotiations with Mexico on it. This is Amsterdam, the canals, 15 years ago, polluted. It started a campaign, this swan building a nest out of garbage, and now the water is clean again. 50% of the population in Africa does not have access to the right amount of water. This is the quality of water when we talk about Africa. And on Kiribati, small island state, as so many around the world, this woman's house is now already gone because of sea level rise. Water needs a transformative approach. Water, you would say the earth is blue. It's a lie. Any astronaut or scientist or politician that tells you it's a lie. It's only paint. It's like a little carpet on the top. This is all the water there is. There is no more water in the whole world. No more. Not in the soil, not in the air, nothing. This is everything. And that middle bulb, there's actually 3 of them. For those of you in the back, you don't see that. But the middle one, the size of the state of Kentucky, is the only water we as mankind can use. So water is scarce. People will feel the impact from climate change most profoundly through water. It's already causing 90% of all disasters worldwide, 90%, impacting 2 billion people in the next decades because of too much water, and almost another 2 billion because of a lack of water. Water is impacting the economies, 15% in current days, and 50% of our aquifers. And the aquifers are our natural storage tanks of water, you could say, and they're big. 50%, 50, is past their tipping point. It means that natural recovery is impossible. Water is also an economic thing. The World Bank's Professor Hallegatte does research on the economics of water, showcasing that the impact of only sea level rise and surges, so we don't take all the other crisis aspects of water, only sea level rises and surges will add up to the trillions. And Miami is leading the list with $278 billion at risk. Guangzhou is second, New York third, New Orleans. Even the Netherlands is on there, on number 9. $96 billion at risk in 2050. But what strikes me in a picture like this, and the research that's done by Hallegatte, is you don't see any red bulbs in Africa. Because the economics, the financial economic perspective on water risk in Africa is low, because we value it low. And it means that if finance and dollars and euros or yen are our framework for intervention, which they normally are, we might save Miami, but we will lose out on Africa or on poor population or vulnerable population anywhere in the world. So we have to change the frame how to deal with it. World Economic Forum put water crisis #1 on the list of the next decade. But second is our failure of mankind to adapt and mitigate to climate change. And third is extreme weather events. And 4 is food crisis, all related to water. So water hits the bar hard when it comes to the future. And this is the world when you add up a lot of these water crises, and trust me, red is not a good color. It's also an urban world, a world where we live in deltas, places that are highly vulnerable, and increasing population growth in those deltas is adding up to the billions of people. And those deltas become increasingly vulnerable too, especially because of the way we urbanize, the way we occupy, and the way we develop these deltas. Mississippi Delta on the left. And there's another layer, and that's the geopolitical one, because water does not care about man-made boundaries. Water does not care if you live in Egypt or in Ethiopia. And when Ethiopia builds a dam, the Renaissance Dam, what will Egypt do? Send out their planes to bomb the site or get to a more diplomatic negotiation part? There's more than 60 rivers crossing the border between Bangladesh and India. And each of those rivers is, in its capacity, a possibility for a conflict. But it's not necessary. G7, under the chairmanship of Germany a year ago, concluded that climate change is a matter of national security. We all know that climate change is a matter of national security. They agreed upon it. And water is at the core of that matter of national security. Their evaluation shows that those water boundaries, those transboundary systems, can actually not only be the core of the problem, but also the core of the solution. If you add everything up, the future does not look bright. It's a lot of shit coming at us, and it's moving fast. And I just don't know what it is with this clicker. COP21 was a celebration, but of course it's not, if we're honest. COP21 was not a party. It was merely a mirror of our failure in the past. We have to acknowledge that, to be able to step ahead and step forward, because what comes next is so important. I go back to the World Economic Forum risk report. On the left, it showed that all crises, man-made and non-man-made, geopolitical, environmental, climate change, water, all increase in impact and frequency. So we will have more, and it's going to be worse. So this is your nightmare. When you wake up in the middle of your night and you're sweating, this is the left side of the slide. But the right side of the slide shows you salvation, or at least the way out. The right side of the slide shows from the research that all those crises are interdependent. They're related, both in their origin, so hey, this is mitigation strategy if we do it better, and their impact. This is where adaptation comes in. So designers, planners, engineers, scientists, politicians, you in the room, can, because of this interdependency, come up with sustainable and resilient solutions that fix both the mitigation as well as the adaptation part. We need this transformative approach. Now, when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, it hit a country that is run by a president that understands climate change, that understands the importance of acting different. When he entered office, President Obama said, "No Katrina on my watch." And he meant, I don't want to see a dysfunctioning, fragmented government right after Katrina. I want the federal government on the ground working together. But this president faces a Congress where the chair of the Environmental Committee, Mr. Inhofe, actually says man can't change climate, only God can. Then came the Pope. And I was hopeful, because the Pope said, well, man did change climate, and it's on us. So I was hoping Mr. Inhofe was a Catholic. And I'm not going into religious. I hate this clicker. I'm very sorry. What should I do to make it work?
We'll have to do it here. Just tell me.
No. Man can't change climate, only God can, said Inhofe. Then came the Pope, and I was hopeful Inhofe was a Catholic, but he's a Protestant, so he doesn't listen to the Pope. I'll do this. And now we face this man that actually thinks climate change is bullshit. Well, that I agree, it should be, but it's not, of course. Climate change is tough, it's slow for any politician. What is sea level rise over the last 100 years? 50 centimeters? That's coming from a professor, watch. More or less. It's only 5 what? No, it's 24, so you see, this is a bunch of very good professionals you don't even know. For a politician, 24 centimeters is nothing. It's nothing, and it doesn't matter if in the future it's going to be a meter or more. Sandy showed that the World Economic Forum risk report is right. Sandy showed that those interdependencies were on... I hate it. I have to walk, so... This is the research we did right after Sandy. Red is vulnerable population, blue is a storm surge. They're connected. So with the surge comes contamination of polluted water, and it's hitting poorer communities hard. We know poor people live in poor places all over the world, also in the Netherlands, so also in the US. I was here in Newark, industrial site. The surge was 6 meters. 6 meters, and it was all contaminated water. They had to close the playgrounds because the soil lit up at night. One of the neighbors said, I don't know, but EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, did close the playgrounds because the soil was so contaminated. A surge like that, a storm like that, causes more problems than only water. 75% of the power supply in the floodplain, 90% of the sewage system in the same floodplain. So a storm like Sandy is like a magnifying glass to your problems. It showcases social and physical vulnerabilities. It also showcases the vulnerability of the system. Turning Manhattan, because of the shutdown of one power plant, in a NOPO and a SOPO, a north of power and a south of power. In a region that's fragmented in its bureaucracy, fragmented in its government, fragmented in its politics. Different constitutions lead different states with different politicians. You have a big mayor in New York, no mayors on Long Island, and voluntary mayors in New Jersey, and they have to bring salvation to the truth. And an implementation agency that's hijacked by politics. They can't deal with it. And in that fragmentation, with that amount of disaster, Congress appropriates $10 and then $50 billion to safeguard the region. And the president says, what shall we do? And he appoints Sean Donovan as chair of the task force. Kill this thing. Sean is on the beach. And then when you go in the region, and you have all this fragmentation and all this money, and you find this sign on a wall that says, we all hate you, Sandy, then you all of a sudden realize that this man lost his house, his wife, his business, and he's not interested in the frame that Rahm Emanuel put in place that never wastes a good crisis. He doesn't want to leapfrog to the future. He doesn't want to listen to a bold Dutch guy who wants to work with the task force on innovation. He doesn't care about a president that says climate change is real or about a Republican governor that says it is not. He wants to go back. So leapfrog into the future actually means that there's a disconnect, not so much between business, academia, and government, but that there is a disconnect between professionals and the people that were affected hard. So if we want to get to solutions, It's really about collaboration across all, not only across those we know, politicians and policymakers and scientists and businesses, no, with everybody, community leaders, activists, and the guys and girls you don't want to see in the room. So, when President Obama appointed Sean Donovan, former commissioner of New York under Mayor Bloomberg, then Secretary of Housing and Urban Development at the Department of HUD, Donovan said, I need to know more about water. So he went to the Netherlands, where I was Director General, and it's a long story, but I'm not going to tell you. You all know the Netherlands, right? You know we live below sea level, and we invented it. So Donovan concluded after the conversation, water is cultural for the Dutch. Can you make it cultural for New York, he said. Can you turn water at the heart of the way we deal with our uncertain future? Turning water into a cultural thing, a way of living in a country where the response to disaster is adding up to the billions in only repair money, nothing in preparing for the future. In the tens of billions in the 80s, over almost 100 billion right now, and that's only repair money. In a country where this is federal policy, raising your houses on stilts because of the national disaster response framework and its policy framework. So President Obama came up with two approaches, his climate action plan and the Hurricane Sandy rebuilding strategy. I worked on, with Sean Donovan, on the Hurricane Sandy rebuilding task force. The task force was tasked to bring help and aid in the region, then repair and then rebuild. But it left out the future. We were not thinking about the future, and we had 50 billion of infrastructure investment. So I said, we have to leapfrog. We have to reach for that future. We have to be able to innovate. We need a transformative approach that on one hand picks us up by our hairs out of our current frameworks, out of our current lockings. And on the other hand, the metaphor of the Trojan horse, where you bring something else in to cause a revolution or prevent a war. You all know these two, right? Yeah. Suppose they married and got babies. Perhaps that's what we need. Love childs from Moses and Jacob. Those love childs the culture of those child are ingrained in an approach where a long-term comprehensive approach is key, but connected to short-term innovations. You need to have that combination, long-term and short-term. And at the same time, you want transparency and accountability in a public and private collaboration. So everything is accounted for from a money perspective, also a social perspective. And you need inclusive collaboration, not only between government, business, and academia, but between all. And you have to do this programmatically, over and over again. So it's repeated and evaluated. But it's not enough. You need design. Now, why do you need design? Design is at the core of such an approach. Why? It's a little complex, but I have to tell you. Design has the capacity, from a technical point of view, to build solutions programmatically. We all know a house, we know the program, we know a street. But it has a broader perspective. Design can bridge gaps between scales, local, city, region, nation, international, time, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and sectors, infrastructure, housing, green, ecology, environment, water, etc. So design is the possibility to connect. But then there's a third aspect to design, and that's the ambition one. Design can help the ambition from a political point of view, a societal point of view, an activist point of view, to really make something different. So design can help turn such a process into an impactful one. I created Rebuild by Design as an effort of collaboration bringing innovation to the New York region. It was based on some principles. One was you need a safe place. A place where negotiation is not the first, not the core, but collaboration. A place also where you can bring in politicians as much as activists. People that were done wrong as much as people that want to do right. Designers and professionals and engineers next to policymakers and activists. You also need, for that safe place, a process that takes you a little bit out of your current locked-in boundaries, your policies, your regulations. Innovation never starts from current-day policies. Policies are based on the science of yesterday, and innovation, is the base for the science of tomorrow. So that's tough. But it's also a detour. I described it as a detour. You have to be able to sidestep current practices, but at the same time, you have to bring it back in. Otherwise, the current condition will never change, and you will create two worlds. One that's the world that we know, and then the world that might be effective and efficient, but it's only there in response to disasters. You need to bring in design. There's no superheroes, and it's very critical that talent meets talent. We brought in the talent of the world to connect to the talent of the region, the people that were affected, that were impacted. New batteries, yeah. And you need collaboration. You need Wow, yeah, those turbo batteries, yeah. Okay. You need collaboration that's based on inclusive leadership. And inclusive leadership, to my account, meant that the door was always open. No one was ever too late. And you know this. When a government says, we have to work together, let's close the door first and figure out our mind, or business does the same. But for inclusive collaboration, there's no such thing. You should always be open to the others. And we try this all over the world. We try this in the Netherlands with Room for the River. We try this in Bangladesh. The sound's getting crazier when I'm standing. We tried this in Egypt, in the Nile Delta, in Myanmar, in Mozambique, in Poland, Vietnam, Colombia, and we tried it in New York. We tried it with a competition called Rebuild by Design, a competition that started with a call for talent, got 10 teams with over 250 professionals, reached out to over 500 organizations, worked with universities, politicians, did an analysis first and asked the question first before we got to solution. A competition that did research on the ground in buses and trains and bikes, and we walked. We talked to thousands of people, brought them together in different events to culture and design and politics. And out of that research, there came a firm understanding of the interdependencies, uncertainties, vulnerabilities, as well as opportunities for the region. We selected 10 of them, and on those 10, we built coalitions, not solutions. Coalitions of collaboration first before we got to answers and ideas. And those coalitions brought forward the ideas. So we had a regional approach that connected with the local talent. A regional approach where the needs from the region and the needs from climate change were brought together through a federal approach where 23 agencies were involved, as much as Occupy Sandy and other activists, NGOs from the region. Supported by philanthropy, implementation dollars at the end, and a whole group and set of professionals that worked around it. We had 10 teams covering the whole region. 10 teams that faced any aspect of that vulnerability, and that were trying to connect the politics of these big guys with the needs of the communities on the ground. And they did this through a design effort that was ingrained in a collaborative approach. MIT focused on the Meadowlands, the place where the Sopranos live, and turned the swamp back into a healthy system. OMA turned Hoboken into a system through a comprehensive approach. Room for the River was re-envisioned on Long Island. Hunts Point and the food market were protected not by physics engineering, but by social engineering. The Big U turned Manhattan into a safe place with a granular approach, and we built concrete oyster reefs off the shore of Staten Island to reinvigorate the oyster community, change the ecology, and protect the island. 6 of the 10 projects were groundbreaking. We allocated almost $1 billion. It was a process that was built on leadership, collaboration, and innovation, connecting the ownership of those communities with a design approach. It brought back Sabbatical Detour, a cultural change within the federal government. And we developed a national disaster recovery, resiliency competition, as much as an international challenge in the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and Southeast Asia. Now we're doing rebuild by design type of approaches, but it's not enough. It's not a plan, it's not a blueprint, but it's about a change of culture. And the future is dark, as I started with. We now agreed upon SDGs, but how will we implement those SDGs in an inclusive way, including all? One of the efforts that started is that the United Nations and the World Bank got together with 10 presidents and prime ministers of 10 countries to vigorously drive water resiliency across the board. They have 2 years to come up with innovative ideas. Innovative ideas that are not done by government, but through a strong coalition where the countries, the bank, and the UN reached out to others like the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation, the World Water Council. And that's not enough. We need to add that layer of inclusiveness, that layer of innovation, that layer of a comprehensive long-term approach where short-term innovative projects can become the example for water resiliency if it's too much, too little, or too polluted water, and bring that forward. So this is not our future, nor is water ever going to be a weapon of mass destruction. And let's forget about the mismanagement of the Colorado River and reinvent the way we perceive it. No pollution, water for all, and it better be clean. And we can't save her house, it's gone. But we can think of ways how to deal with that type of vulnerability from a social perspective, a political perspective, as much as from an environmental one. We need a global transformative approach that's based on a cultural change, because in the end, it's not so much about us. We're pretty much okay. It's about them. Thank you.